Hello, I'm Elazer Barnette. I'm the former dean for the School of Technology at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. Today, I'm going to talk with you about advancing excellence in technological literacy, student assessment, professional development, and program standards. An overview of my presentation will be on technological literacy, looking at how we integrate student assessment standards, the integration of professional development standards, and integrating program standards. AETL has a set of standards, 3 interrelated sets of standards. The first one we'll look at is student assessment. Student assessment has 5 standards, along with 23 guidelines. The professional development standards has 7, along with 36 guidelines. And the program standards for teachers and administrators, well, you'll see 5 standards with 24 guidelines that focuses on the teacher component and 30 for the administrators. As we look at advancing excellence in technological literacy, there's some questions that we typically ask. The what's, the whys, the who's, and overall the vision. Well, first of all, AETL was published in 2003 as a companion for the Standards for Technological Literacy. It is vital because STL could not stand alone and provide sufficient educational reform for the study of technology. The WHO component was the ITEEA, along with Technology for All Americans project, had several writing teams and others who were internal as well as external reviewers to review the overall standards and provide the feedback. The overall vision for AETL is based on the vision that all students can and should be technologically literate. Well, if we talk about students being technologically literate, what is technological literacy? ITEA has defined technological literacy as the ability to use, to manage, to assess, and to understand technology. Well then, how do we know when we have a technological literate person? Well, there are several characteristics that help us overall define what a technological literate person really is. Those characteristics are a problem solver. You'll find individuals who are able to look at problems, understand technological concepts. Another characteristic is that they are understanding the technological impacts and the consequences. In other words, students are looking at the overall trade-offs that are some of the consequences of technological innovations. The other component is systems orientation and creative consequences. And along with that, students understand a variety of concepts that are related to systems approach in solving technological problems. The uses of concepts from other content areas. It's important that we utilize the science, the math, the social studies, and language arts, and other content areas for understanding and managing technological systems. And it's also important that a technological literate person appreciate the interrelationship between technology and individuals and society. In other words, the overall impacts and the trade-offs related to those components. And finally, they need to understand that technology is the result of human activity and as well as innovation. With that, there are several publications that are provided by ITEA to help teachers and administrators develop and implement technological literacy standards-based programs. Those 2 documents, of course, one is the Standards for Technological Literacy, as we call STL, and the companion AETL, Advancing Excellence in Technological Literacy. Recently, 4 addendas have been developed to help support STL. One is measuring progress, focusing on assessing students for technological literacy. The second one is realizing excellence that focuses on technology programs. The third is developing professionals that focuses on professional development of teachers. And the last one is planning and learning that focuses on technology curriculum. Let's look at putting the pieces together. How do we utilize the various documents and information we have to produce standards-based programs? With the information that's already been provided, it should be less of a challenge for technology teachers and administrators to implement technology education and also implement technology standards-based programs. Let's look at the first set of standards, which would be AETL, and we're looking at the student assessment standards. The graphics that you're looking at, notice that we're looking at measuring progress, assessing students for technological literacy. That's important to note that they're based on AETL as well as STL. Now, it is really important that you understand that measuring progress is not a standalone or a substitute for the standards in AETL or STL. For us, for the student assessment standards, there are 5, and they have a theme, or we say 5 topics, and those topics are consistency, and you'll find that all of the standards in AETL, the first one will deal with consistency as it relates to STL. The other one is the organizing topic, is the intended purpose. It should be explicitly matched with the student learning. The third one is the research-based assessment based on principles. The fourth one looks at the overall practical context relative to the student learning. And finally, we need to look at how we incorporate the data collection for accountability as we move forward in student assessment standards. As we get started, we need to focus on the big picture. What is the big picture? We need to take our time, sit back, pause for a moment, and then we need to draw from what content do we need to focus on as we focus on the student assessment. Some of the questions that we need to ask: where are we now? In other words, we want to look at the overall health of your technology program. Where are we now? Where do we want to go? When we think about where are we now, we might want to look at what standards are we using to determine where we are now. Where do we want to go? You might want to look at the benchmarks that you find in STL, or either the guidelines that you have in AETL as to where you want to go. How are we going to get there? Again, utilizing standards-based approach. What knowledge and abilities must educators possess to get there? Well, then we need to focus on professional development so that the educators will have the necessary or requisite knowledge to move forward. And how will we know when you get there? You need to be sure that your assessment matches the overall intended purpose of your program. Let's take a look at a 5-step approach for standards-based assessment of technological literacy. And at this particular point, we want to look at the course level. However, this is also appropriate at the unit level as well as the program level. First of all, we need to think of this as not a one-time event. If we go with Wiggin and Matai, this is a collection or a continuous process when you're looking at overall assessment. The first piece looks at identifying the content standards, and then you need to select the benchmarks. Again, you have 2 documents that we talked about, as well as the 4 addendas to look at your content standards, but focusing really on the STL for your content standards and benchmarks. The second component is you need to extract and organize the content. You can extract the benchmarks, where you get the big ideas as you move forward with your content. Then you need to define the assessment criteria. What are the big ideas that you want your students to know? Fourth, you need to select and use the assessment tools, and I want to say the appropriate assessment tools and methods to move towards those big ideas that you have defined. And finally, you want to make use of assessment results. It is important that you provide feedback as a result of the data that you've collected relative to the assessment. This can be done at the unit level, as I said earlier, as well as the program level. At the unit level, you're going to follow the same 5 steps been defined at the course level. And when you think of a course, typically the course takes place over a 6 weeks, 9 weeks, or it could be a semester. However, a unit is normally an activity that occurs within a course. And this could happen at unit 1, 2, or whatever number of units you choose to have within your course. Or as I said, you can do this at an overall program, and the program consumes everything that happens in the overall total student learning teaching process. There are some principles that are also important as we look at standards-based assessment. First one, let's look at the utilization of fair and equitable student assessment methods. It's very important that you focus on not being biased or discriminatory as you look at your overall assessment tools and techniques. Also, you need to establish a valid and reliable measurements. Again, you need to make sure that you're measuring what you have set out to measure in the first place, or the intended purpose. It is also important that you continue to reflect on the current research on student learning, as we all know that the research is continuously changing, so it's important that teachers continue to focus on those changes and make adjustments within the overall program. And it's also important that you incorporate both the formative as well as the summative student assessment. Now, when we focus on the formative, that's something that the teachers do daily, as they look at the students, review them, ask questions, etc. However, the summative component focuses on activities that normally occur at the end of the unit, normally in the form of a test, multiple choice, or it could be in a portfolio development type of assessment document. Also, you need to focus on enhancing the student learning. That's what it's all about when we think about assessment. What can we do to improve the overall teaching learning environment, and how do we know that the students are moving towards this thing that we call technological literacy? We need to allow for student commonalities and diversity. We know that we have students bring all sorts of things into the laboratory or the classroom. So we need to be able to praise those types that are common. We also need to be able to look at those differences, and we need to be able to develop our assessment to be able to maintain or incorporate those commonalities as well as diversity. We need to include students in the assessment process. Many times we look at assessment without ever thinking about the students need to be involved. Students love to be involved in defining the overall assessment. And we find that when they get involved in defining the assessment, they really get involved in really increasing the overall teaching and learning component. We need to reflect on the current technological content, and we need to utilize authentic assessment. In other words, it needs to be real to the students so they can see that this is a real world experience. Now let's move to the next standard, which will be professional development standards. We're looking at the document now called Developing Professionals Preparing Technology Teachers. Again, the developing professionals based on AETL as well as STL. Again, the document or Addenda Developing Professionals is not a substitute for AETL as well as STL. This particular standard has 7 components, and there, of course, there are 7 organizational topics. Like the previous one, it starts off with consistency relative to STL. The second piece is looking at, when we look at professional development, looking at students as learners. That's what it's all about, students as learners of technology. The third component, you want to focus on the curricula and the programs in the overall development. Teachers should be prepared to design and evaluate the technology at that component. The next one looks at instructional strategies. We look at those strategies that will enhance the overall teaching learning environment. The fifth one focuses on how you manage that teaching and learning environment. The sixth one looks at continuous professional development. It is important that we be lifelong learners. And number 7 looks at the pre-service and in-service. And the way we move towards lifelong learning is the pre-service component that occurs normally at your undergraduate as well as graduate education, and then the in-service that occurs after you complete your degree. Well, professional development is defined as the continuous process of lifelong learning and growth that begins early in life, continues through the undergraduate, the pre-service experience, and extends through the in-service years. Again, it is important that teachers, administrators continuously stay involved in overall professional development. As we move to the next component, as we start planning, we need again to look at the big picture. And the planning questions that we talked about earlier, again, where are we now, where do we go, all the way down to how do we know when we have arrived. It's important that you be able to address those questions as you move forward in the overall planning process. How then do we integrate the professional development standards? Well, first of all, you need to start with the standards. And we've already talked about the standards STL as well as AETL. You need to look at how do you look at overall improving the student learnings. What can you do to enhance the overall content and pedagogical knowledge that's important? Again, the teachers, administrators need to be involved in the overall professional development. We need to promote professionalism. Students need to see how you act as a professional so that they can improve in their overall dispositions as young professionals. You need to be able to align with other reform initiatives, whether it's local, state, provincial, etc. And you need to promote collegiality and collaborative exchanges, and you need to focus on ongoing and career embedded and sustained, and also be accountable relative to the overall measures. And here's an approach we need to look at. There are really 4 major components. You need to focus on your groundwork. You need to frame the professional education components. You need to build teacher understanding, and you need to evaluate professional education. I've added one more component, and that is market what happens. Now, for example, when you're doing the groundwork, you need to get your stakeholders involved. If you want to have continuous support, start with your stakeholders, whether they be other faculty members, principals, community leaders, etc. When you're framing your professional education, you need to identify the teacher learning needs. You need to know what they are. You need to be able to define the content again, look at your STL components, and you need to be able to organize what happens in the overall professional development plan. You need to build on your teacher understandings. Teachers not only in the technology program, but in the other areas, need to understand exactly what you mean about technology and how you move forward towards standards-based assessment. You need to continually evaluate, and the last one that I'm looking at is called marketing your program. You need to market the program, because once you market the program, you can really get your stakeholders to buy into what you're doing and really move towards continuous support for your program. The last component is realizing excellence when we look at the program standards, and that's structural and technology programs. Again, based on AETL and STL, the document realizing excellence, again, should not be substituted for the standards that you'll find in AETL as well as STL. Integrating programs, again, will have 5 standards. And again, it starts with consistency with STL, as I said, with the other 2. Now, this time, the technology programs are focusing on implementation. How do we implement the new programs? How do you evaluate the programs once you start the implementation process? And how do you look at creating effective learning environments, and how do you look at the overall management? That's what the 5 standards are focusing on for integrating programs. Now, AETL defines a program as everything that affects the overall student learning, including the content, professional development, curricula, instruction. In other words, everything that happens in the overall teaching learning environment. Again, when we start this process, we'll look at the big picture. Again, we look at where are we now, all the way down to how do we know when we have arrived. And again, remember, when we talk about where are we now, we're focusing again on our standards, and we know when we arrive, and we can look and see if we have matched up the overall intended purpose with the overall assessment system. As we look at integrating program standards, we need to have a vision. It's important that you do have a vision. And as we said earlier, in laying the groundwork, you need to solicit the support from other stakeholders. The program must be structured as you look and as you're supporting documents. And as we indicate, a variety of resources are available. You need to also continually monitor and make adjustments, because teachers realize that this is not a linear process. You need to constantly monitor your program and tweak it, as we say in many cases, and reevaluate it. And again, as I said earlier, market your program. How do we know when we have a model program? We have several characteristics of a model program. Of course, technological literacy is the foundation of those particular programs. Real-type learning, real-world experiences for learning. Again, equity, so students feel comfortable in those particular programs. There should be articulation across grade levels, also across the discipline. That's why it's important to get other faculty members involved with what you're doing, as well as other administrators within the local unit. You need to work with your professional community. That's your PTAs, PTOs, and other outside groups to help support your overall programs. And of course, rely on the current research and be flexible with your program. We know change is coming, so you always need to be flexible with what you choose to do in your programs, and also you need to be accountable and visible. Where are we and what are we doing for the future? ITEA is constantly evolving, providing a variety of documents to support your programs, and constantly look at your website to what's happening relative to ITEA, and also look at CATS. CATS, or the Center for Advanced in the Teaching of Technology and Science, we call CATS. It's constantly doing curricular work. And we have a new piece called the National Center for Engineering and Technology Education. It's one of 17 NSF-funded centers for learning and teaching in this country. And of course, they're focusing on infusing engineering content and design and problem solving, but the overall goal is looking at the diversity in engineering and providing technology teachers. I want to thank you for this presentation and have an opportunity to talk with you today. For additional information, you want to contact ITEA, or you can contact me at the number that you have listed. And of course, this presentation was developed from a grant by ITEA, the National Education Association. Again, as I said earlier, for more information, you want to contact ITEA Standards for Technological Literacy Standards Specialist, Professional Development Curriculum, and contact the International Technology Education Association. Thank you.